Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie The Promised Land in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called The Promised Land. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it. All the interesting facts about this movie in today's video, I am going to tell you. I am also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, talking detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, starcast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. The Promised Land, Danish, Bastarden, lit. The Bastard, is a 2023 epic historical drama film directed by Nikolaj Arcel and written by Arcel and Anders Thomas Jensen. Based on the 2020 book The Captain and Anne Barbara by Ida Jensen. 6. The film is a joint Danish-German-Swedish co-production starring Mads Mikkelsen, Amanda Collin and Simon Bennebjerg, and with Christine Kuja Thorpe, Gustav Lind, Jakob Lohmann, Morten He Andersen, Magnus Krepper and Felix Kramer in supporting roles. The Promised Land had its world premiere on the 31st of August 2023 at the 80th Venice International Film Festival, where it competed for the Golden Lion. It was selected as the Danish entry for the Best International Feature Film at the 96th Academy Awards and was one of the 15 finalist films in the December shortlist. Plot: in 1755, Captain Ludvig Collin, an impoverished Danish officer of humble birth, retires after 25 years of service in the German army with a measly pension. He obtains permission from the Royal Danish Court to build a property on the barren Jutland moorland for land cultivation. He hopes to establish a settlement on this land, and in return for that he requests from the court the privilege of a noble title with an associated manor. Soon after arriving at the site of his prospective homestead, he comes into conflict with Frederick Schinkel, a local magistrate at the nearby Hald Manor, and merciless landowner who has been trying to monopolize ownership of the moorland. Schinkel does his utmost to make a workforce unavailable to Collin, who covertly employs and harbors Johannes Eriksson and his wife Anne Barbara, two of Schinkel's indentured serf farmers who broke their contract and fled Schinkel's mistreatment. After being led to their camp by Anmai Moose, a Romani girl he catches trying to steal from him, he also hires the Tater Romani travelers as workers, despite this practice being illegal. In the meantime, Schinkel's cousin and betrothed Edel Helene is not interested in marrying him, but her father insists on the marriage due to Schinkel's substantial wealth, unless she can come up with an alternative suitor within a year. At a harvest ball, Edel meets Collin secretly and share a kiss to seal the understanding that if he can acquire a noble title within the year, they will marry, offering her an escape from the union with her cousin. Towards the end of the party, Schinkel reveals that he has recaptured Johannes while he was on his way to the coast to acquire clay for Collin's farm. The escaped serf is tortured to death with boiling water by his former master in front of appalled party guests. Collin takes Johannes' body back to his wife. Seeing the boiled body of their fellow worker, the travelers leave Collin's employment, though Anmai manages to stay behind. Despite multiple challenges during a brutal winter, with Anne's and Anmai's help, Collin manages to plant the potatoes brought from Germany and harvest 80 sacks. In the process, the three form an unofficial family. Collin and Anne start a sexual relationship. When the king receives report of the successful harvest, he orders the establishment of a settlement on Collin's estate. Collin is conferred the title of Royal Surveyor, and 50 settlers from northern Germany are sent to his land. The superstitious settlers are repulsed by Anmai, though she manages to stay out of sight and learns reading and surveying from Collin. Furious at Collin's success, Schinkel imports convicts to attack the new settlement, killing 2 settlers and half of the livestock. In revenge, Collin and a few settlers attack and kill the perpetrators in their hideout, though he is forced to send Anmai away in exchange for their help. This betrayal also causes Anne to leave. Schinkel's officer, Preisler, witnesses the killings and flees. Schinkel and his fellow estate owners report this to the king's cabinet. The new settlement's ownership is transferred to Schinkel, and Collin is arrested. While Collin is being tortured at Schinkel's estate, Anne sneaks in and prepares a poisoned drink. Edel leads Schinkel into drinking it. While he is incapacitated, Anne comes in and stabs him in the stomach and castrates him. Butler Bondo explains everything to the king's cabinet. Collin is released, Anne is imprisoned for life, and Edel returns to her home in Norway. Collin locates Anmai and promises to take care of her, and the two begin living on the farm. Several years later, an officer informs Collin that he is granted the title of Baron, and that 400 new settlers will be arriving soon. Before that happens, a now teenage Anmai leaves with a group of Romani travelers. Collin leaves the moor and his title is annulled. He eventually frees Anne from a traveling prisoner cart, and they ride a horse towards the sea. Cast Mads Mikkelsen as Ludvig Collin, Amanda Collin as Anne, Barbara Simon Bennebjerg as Fredrik Schinkel, Melina Hagberg as Anmai Mus, Christine Kuja-Thorpe as Edel, Helene Gustav Lind as Anton Eklund, Morten He Andersen as Johannes Eriksson, Thomas W. Gabrielsen as Bondo Magnus, Krepper as Hector Søren Malling as Polly Morten Borean as Lauenfelt, Jacob Lohmann as Trapphaud, Olaf Heigard as Preisler Felix Kramer. Production principal photography began on September 5, 2022 and wrapped in early November of the same year. Filming took place on locations in Germany, Sweden, and Czechia. Release The Promised Land had its world premiere on August 31, 2023 at the 80th Venice International Film Festival, to then screen on September 7, 2023 at the 48th Toronto International Film Festival. It was also invited at the 28th Busan International Film Festival in World Cinema section and was screened on the 6th of October 2023. It was released commercially on October 5, 2023 in Danish theaters. Reception, critical response. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 96% of 108 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 7.9/10. The website's consensus reads, Mads Mikkelsen leads us through the savage terrain of the Promised Land with a glimmer of hope in this epic Nordic tale with Western bones. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 77 out of 100, based on 29 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Mads Mikkelsen grows potatoes when the chips are down in a rip-roaring historical drama. A commoner turned captain is locked in a grisly land battle with a dastardly nobleman in Nikolaj Arcel's entertaining, broad-brush epic, lent weight by its ever-reliable star. The Promised Land deserves a sexier title than The Promised Land. It's hard to hear those well-worn words and not expect something as beige and starchy as the spuds grown on its titular terrain. It has one, in fact. The native Danish title for Nikolaj Arcel's film translates as The Bastard, which has the advantage of applying in different senses to both its male principles and rather better captures the spirit of this lavishly upholstered historical romp, which may pose nobly at points, but gradually reveals a heart of pure boy's own hokum. Notionally rooted in historical fact, but embellished with storybook romance and flouncing cartoon villainy, this roundly enjoyable Venice competition entry finally owes all its residual gravitas, and at least half its considerable handsomeness, to the expressive woodcut visage of one Mads Mikkelsen. Funny thing about that face, with its razored planes and coolly sloping brows, it's one that Hollywood deems suitable only for the most acrid of bad guys, from the dapper young Hannibal Lecter to the time-traveling Nazi of the last Indiana Jones effort. Whereas on home turf, the Dane gets to be the very picture of honorable alpha masculinity. That's certainly the case here, where Mikkelsen plays the real-life 18th-century army captain Ludvig Collin, a stoic man's man of fatherless, dirt-poor origins who defied the usual outlook for boys of his class bracket to rise through the military ranks on the strength of his tenacity and valor. Perhaps U.S. casting directors would swap him with the soft, puppy-faced Simon Bennebjerg, here a hoot, as Collin's irredeemably coal-souled aristocratic nemesis. Happily, Denmark trusts a sharp, carved angle, also hard and rugged and forbiddingly beautiful. Denmark's Jutland Heath, a vast, sprawling expanse of near-barren land depleted by Stone Age farmers, where only a rolling rug of mauve-brown heather survives its sandy soil. Introductory title cards explain an 18th century government policy of inviting foreign settlers to cultivate the land, with little success. The heath cannot be tamed, reads the final one, a pretty irresistible opening salvo, practically begging the viewer to ask, or can it, as the imposingly upright Collin stomps onto the scene. Having left the military, Collin applies for permission to build an agricultural settlement on the heath, demanding a noble title should he succeed. Scornful of this presumptuous soldier in a flea-ridden uniform, and certain they won't have to honor their half of the bargain, fat cat ministers grant his request. With the assistance of a motley crew of laborers, including married runaway servants Anne Barbara Amanda Collin and Johannes Morton He Anderson, Collin builds a rustic farmhouse and gets to work. Unbeknownst to his overlords, he has an idea for a resilient crop that might just grow in this hostile ground. It's new from Germany, and it's going to be big. Potatoes, they're called. Perhaps you've heard of them. It's a solid if back-breaking plan, and would proceed steadily enough if not for the unseemly envy of neighboring nobleman Frederick de Schinkel, Bennebjerg, a petty local despot who insists, despite Collin's permission from the king, that this scrubby land belongs to him. Raging, irrational spite is a driving dramatic motive in Arcel and Anders Thomas Jensen's screenplay, adapted from Ida Jessen's 2020 novel, The Captain and Anne Barbara. Political particulars and conflicts of the heart are slowly sanded down to a pleasingly classical duel between pure good and pure evil, instigated when de Schinkel, Anne Barbara and Johannes's former master, recaptures and gruesomely tortures the latter to death. With the bereaved Anne Barbara staying on as Collin's housekeeper as the other workers desert, and plucky Romani orphan Anmai Mus, Hagbard Melina, doggedly forcing her way into the household, a tender, makeshift family unit takes shape. Were it not for the hysterically deranged lord across the moor sporadically tormenting the good farmer and slaughtering his help, the promised land would almost play out as a kind of Scandi Little House on the Prairie, with affecting everyday concerns of health, hearth, and home, countered by an escalating blood feud of far more outlandish fictional proportions. Elsewhere, the top-heavy script also takes on matters of racial prejudice, as Collin's German migrant workers superstitiously shun the dark-skinned Anmai, and squeezes in a curtailed love triangle between Collin, Anne Barbara, and de Schinkel's gilded caged cousin Edel, Christine Kuja Thorpe, subplots that scarcely have room to breathe amid all the brawny, bloody back and forth. But it all just about hangs together, in part because Mikkelsen's wounded, watchful performance bridges the film's gung-ho heroics with its more soulful ambitions, and in part because Arcel, comfortably back on home turf as a director after 2017's drab Stephen King adaptation The Dark Tower, has a pleasingly sturdy, old-school feel for grand-scale period filmmaking. Much like in Arcel's 2012 costumer A Royal Affair, The Promised Land fills out its widescreen abundantly, but not fussily. Shooting largely in the Czech Republic, Rasmus Videbeck's sweeping burnished lensing makes the heath a scraggly Nordic desert of year-round autumn tones, save for when snow is layered onto the scenic drudgery. The frilliest excesses of Jet Lehman's rich production design and Kiki Alander's costumes seek only to highlight the showy grotesquerie of the rich. Heroes are shot and clothed in shades of burlap and timber. One amusingly unsubtle composition pits Bennebjerg's seated fop, a vision in pastel satin at a table bedecked with molded jellies, against Mikkelsen on literal horseback, good bastard towering over bad, highlighting that The Promised Land is finally nothing so much as a Danish Western, built on black and white moral binaries and a yeehaw sense of intrepid adventure. The Promised Land is about 10 movies in one. It's a history lesson with a central figure driven by an impossible quest. There are bands of outlaws, sadistic aristocrats, and downtrodden peasants. There's a little romance, a lot of torture, as well as a feisty runaway child. Historical epics like this really aren't made anymore. There are so many different chapters of the central conflict, it makes the final confrontation inevitable, and therefore a little predictable. However, there's still unexpected space, and the film takes its time, allowing for character development and emotional connection. It's a wonder that The Promised Land works as well as it does. Directed by Nikolaj Arcel, the film takes place in 18th century Denmark, when agricultural reforms cracked the rigid social hierarchies, where the rich lived in luxury and the little people were practically in a state of serfdom. Mads Mikkelsen, in his second collaboration with Arcel, plays Ludvig Collin, a man who hauled himself out of obscurity to become a lieutenant in the army. At the film's opening, he is destitute, living in a poor house, and dreaming of developing a piece of land on the Jutland Heath, a land deemed untamable. The Danish king is determined to settle the area. The royal court doesn't want this, and neither do the landowners, but the king grants Ludvig permission to settle a patch of land, promising him a noble title if he succeeds. Ludvig wants that title. The heath soil is so tough, Ludvig can barely dig a hole. A young pastor, Anton Eklund, supportive of the project, offers Ludvig help in the form of 2 runaway tenant farmers, husband Johannes, Morten He Andersen, and wife Anne Barbara, Amanda Collin. Ludvig takes them on with hesitation. People will be looking for them. It's an uneasy situation. Meanwhile, the nearest nobleman, Frederick de Schinkel, Simon Bennebjerg, wants to run Ludvig off the land. Frederick at first glance seems silly and frivolous, but he is eventually revealed as a sadistic monster. He doesn't even try to play Ludvig. It's open warfare from the start. Ludvig also contends with roving bands of outlaws in the nearby forest. To top it off, a runaway child, Melina Hagberg, shows up on Ludvig's doorstep and basically refuses to leave. All of this is a highly fictionalized account of real events. Ludvig Collin was a real person, and the Heath settlement with all its complications was a real event. Ida Jessen's best-selling novel The Captain and Anne Barbara is the basis for the film adaptation, co-written by Anders Thomas Jensen and Arcel. There has clearly been a lot of fictionalization. It feels like this material could have been a bodice-ripping melodrama in less intuitive hands. But The Promised Land has control of its narrative. What's most surprising is just how much character development is accomplished. Mikkelsen's performance is a marvel, really. Haughty at first to Johannes and Anne Barbara, and downright mean to the child, Mikkelsen suggests depths which Ludvig attempts to conceal. What is this man's pain? What is he looking for? Or running from? At times, tiny flickers of human emotion appear at the corners of his eyes or his mouth, softening him. These moments carry more weight because Ludvig is normally so inexpressive. Amanda Collin is very strong as Anne Barbara, whose character development may be the most radical in the whole film. Rasmus Videbek's cinematography captures the landscape in all its moods, lingering on the impenetrable fogs, the nights of howling wind, the glaring sun, the dark fairy tale forest filled with dangers. The interior of de Schinkel's estate is lit by hundreds of candles at night, the effect reminiscent of Kubrick's gorgeous Barry Lyndon. The costumes, Kiki Ylander, and production design, Jet Lehman, are unobtrusive and feel extremely lived in. The conflict in The Promised Land is intense, and Frederick is so despicable he borders on a cartoon villain. There's a sameness in the escalating fight that gets repetitive after a while. What really holds interest in the film is Ludvig's character development and the characters of the makeshift family around him. I cared about these people. They seemed real. The Promised Land is so successful at what it attempts to do, I felt exhilarated when the first fragile seedling popped up above the earth. It's a reminder that a film needs to get the big things right, events and conflicts and obstacles, but it needs to get the small things right too. If a film gets the small things right, then a potato sprouting in the dirt will read like the miracle it is. The most gripping film about potato farming since The Martian, this Danish period epic has Mads Mikkelsen on imperious form as a former soldier on an impossible mission to cultivate the bleak and forbidding landscape of Jutland. The title, its grabbier Danish name Bastarden, captures the film's fierce spirit better, refers to a scrubby peninsula in the country's western fringes. It's so barren, everyone in the 18th century court of Frederick Vesth has all but given up on it. Fortunately, there's one thing more weathered and rugged than this forbidding landscape. Mikkelsen's desperate army veteran, Captain Ludvig Collin. This dogged and down-on-his-luck character has a pitch for the bigwigs. He will cultivate the land for the crown, and in return, the king will ennoble him. It's a safe bet for the crown. The heath cannot be tamed, is the received wisdom. Early scenes, framed in widescreen under leaden skies, see Collin grinding fruitlessly away. He builds a homestead, hiring a pair of escaped servants to help, and forlornly tries to coax life from the dead soil. Danish filmmaker Nikolaj Arcel lets us feel the biting wind on Collin's back and sense the fatigue, before ramping up the stakes with an old-fashioned villain. Enter Frederik de Schinkel, Simon Bennebjerg, extremely hissable, a local landowner who takes a jealous interest in the farmer's progress, eager to maintain the status quo in his corner of Denmark. The Promised Land makes for a gripping man-versus-wilderness survival story with unmistakable political undertones, but it's also nimble enough to allow romance to blossom under its slate-gray skies, when the sweetly abashed captain catches the eye of his steely new hire, Amanda Collin, and de Schinkel's poised fiancée, Christine Kuja-Thorpe. Mikkelsen communicates his character's gradual softening via the tiniest expressions. It's a masterclass in less is more minimalism, and wins you over to a man who can be a bit of a bastard himself when you first meet him. The talented Arcel has had a roller coaster decade or so, veering from the Oscar-nominated acclaim of A Royal Affair, a Danish period piece set a few years later, to the 15% on Rotten Tomatoes ignominy of his Hollywood blockbuster, The Dark Tower. Here, he's crafted a kind of Danish The Last of the Mohicans that's full of passion and political conviction. It should stand the test of time almost as well as its rugged hero. In US theaters Feb 2nd and UK cinemas Feb 16th, there's old-fashioned entertainment value in this tough, if faintly preposterous Nordic Western, a muscular, brash, and well-photographed piece of work from Danish director Nikolaj Arcel, co-written with Anders Thomas Jensen. It's adapted from the 2020 bestseller The Captain and Anne Barbara by Ida Jensen, which is itself loosely inspired by a true story from Denmark's history about the retired 18th-century army captain turned farmer Ludwig von Collin. Collin got royal permission to cultivate the lawless and desolate Jutland Heath, a theoretically lucrative adventure which would reward only the hardiest and most fanatically committed. Mads Mikkelsen plays Collin with granite-faced imperturbability and the kind of silent strength that makes him a Euro Gary Cooper. This movie dreams up romantic and dramatic subplots for this fierce frontiersman, as well as some liberal views on ethnicity that probably never troubled the real-life Collin. Amanda Collin, from HBO TV's Raised by Wolves, plays Anne Barbara, a runaway peasant farmer's wife who takes refuge with Collin and falls in love with him, while Simon Bennebjerg has a panto-villain role of de Schinkel, a cruel, effete landowner near Collin's plantation who sets out to destroy this upstart. There is black comedy of the semi-intentional kind when de Schinkel tortures a peasant in front of a crowd of aghast party guests, and his factotum mutters tensely in his ear that he's losing the crowd. His fiancée Edel, Christine Kuja-Thorpe, is a calmly Norwegian aristocrat who has the improbable hots for our rough-and-ready hero. Collin doggedly carries on with his agricultural work, with the help of a little girl from a Tatar band of Romani travelers, and Mimas Melina Hagberg, who is demonized for her dark skin. Like Arcel's 2012 film A Royal Affair, this is about the extended Regency period of Danish history in the 18th century, something like the UK's madness of George III. The earlier film was about the doctor who effectively ruled Denmark for a year while Christian VII was mad. The Promised Land takes place in the reign of his predecessor Frederik Vesth, who, while drunk, left things to his advisors. It's a watchable though slightly sentimentalized story, and Mikkelsen gives it seriousness and force. Lev Kuleshov would have wet his pants at the sight of Mads Mikkelsen. The Soviet filmmaker and theorist, best known now for stating that the exact same inexpressive shot of an actor could convey any number of feelings depending on what image you cut it with, a phenomenon now known as the Kuleshov effect, believed that montage was at the heart of filmmaking. Actors were models, there for the quality of their faces and the physicality of their bodies, and not so much for their actual acting abilities. They were meant to be molded and bent and reshaped by their directors. Mads Mikkelsen is a phenomenally skilled actor, but he's also clearly the kind of performer who understands the value of a good, cold, hard stare. Partly this is because of the marvelous quality of his face, one of the greatest in all of cinema. Those deep eyes and those perpetually jutting lips seem like they can evoke rage, pity, bemusement, or desire with almost no effort. It's one of the reasons why so many Mikkelsen roles seem like they were designed in a lab specifically for him. Beyond his actual talents, we can read what we want in the man. Even with all that, Mikkelsen is uniquely well-suited for the role of Captain Ludvig Collin, an impoverished Danish war veteran who sets out in the mid-18th century to try and tame the Jutland Heath, a huge and forbidding area where no crop can grow and where lawlessness reigns. Collin was a historical figure, but not much is known about him. The film is based on the novel The Captain and Anne Barbara by the Danish author Ida Jensen. We first see him sitting by a fire, polishing his metals. He has nothing else in this world, not even, apparently, a house, but he aspires to nobility and status. He wants to establish a settlement on the heath in the name of the king. The royal advisors, assuming he'll fail like everyone else who's tried to do it, give Collin the permission to do so, because the king himself has a dream of settling the area and they can pretend to be pursuing this quixotic goal. The Danish title of the film, Bastarden, translates as the bastard, and could be both a literal and spiritual description of Collin. He was born to an unwed servant, most likely the result of her master taking advantage, and he is, at least at first, a tough, at times heartless taskmaster. He's a stickler for propriety and order, obsessed with his mission and his quest for a title. But he also learns that in order to survive on the heath, he has to learn to rely on others. A fugitive couple, Johannes and Anne Barbara, Morten H. Andersen and Amanda Collin, soon join his meager settlement. Despite the grubbiness of his surroundings, Collin insists that Anne Barbara serve him his gruel in neat, centered bowls. In his mind, he's already the proper aristocrat he hopes to be. Again, I cannot adequately express to you how perfect Mikkelsen is in this role. That sensuous frown of his has infinite layers. Johannes and Anne Barbara have fled the clutches of a local landowner, a preening and sadistic aristocrat named Frederik de Schinkel, another historical figure, played with flamboyant insolence by Simon Bennebjerg. De Schinkel wants his servants back, and he's also irked at the thought of Collin establishing a settlement in the name of the king, which would dilute the nobleman's power. Plus, de Schinkel is, to put it mildly, something of a psychopath. This is where the Promised Land transforms from a stately and lyrical tale of rural survival to something more primal and intense. Think Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven crossed with Michael Caton-Jones's Rob Roy, only with more scenes of people being boiled alive. De Schinkel's cruelty and violence force Collin into changing his own ways, because here is a confrontation with a repulsive, real-life version of the privilege he seeks for himself. Now, Mikkelsen's face takes on the quality of disgust and of slow-burning vengefulness. Nikolaj Arcel was one of Denmark's most acclaimed directors, having made the political thriller King's Game and the doomed historical romance A Royal Affair, which was nominated for an Oscar. When he came to the U.S. and made the much reviled and much tampered with Stephen King adaptation The Dark Tower in 2017. Some directors, when faced with such disappointment, stick around and continue to try and prove themselves in the Hollywood blockbuster game. Others go back to basics. Arcel seems to have picked up where he left off in Denmark, telling stories of individuals who have bought into the rules of the established order, only to find their devotion, and sometimes their very selves, snuffed out by the ruthlessness of power. But he's also kept a foot in genre, in the visceral storytelling that American movies have traditionally done so well. The result is the kind of ravishing, rousing epic we don't really get much of anymore. In 1755, the impoverished Captain Ludvig Collin sets out to conquer the harsh, uninhabitable Danish heath with a seemingly impossible goal: to build a colony in the name of the king. In exchange, he'll receive a desperately desired royal name for himself. But the sole ruler of the area, the merciless Frederik de Schinkel, arrogantly believes this land belongs to him. When de Schinkel learns that the maid Anne Barbara and her serf husband have escaped for refuge with Collin, the privileged and spiteful ruler swears revenge, doing everything in his power to drive the captain away. Collin will not be intimidated and takes up the unequal battle, not only risking his life, but also the family of outsiders that has formed around him. The Promised Land, written and directed by Nikolaj Arcel, follows Ludvig Collin, Mads Mikkelsen, a retired military captain, as he sets out on a seemingly impossible task to cultivate an arid patch of country known as the Heath. Despite grave danger and without support nor confidence, Collin's undertaking to claim land and honor seems doomed from the beginning. His fortune changes with the arrival of two hard-working runaways, but it becomes clear that there is a lot more to worry about than the land's providence. Arcel deftly assembles several compelling motivations and obstacles from the get-go, and then folds them neatly away into the background as Collin sets out. It gives the beginning of the film and that first break into the slow-moving scenes of the isolated wilderness a real sense of space. This apparently unforgiving frontier reveals itself with gentle light and golden afternoons. It binds the main character into a natural mutualism with a force that every character consistently expresses fear at. As the endlessly vile Schinkel, a flawless performance by Bennebjerg, expresses a philosophy that directly contradicts what we've seen as an audience so far, he is quickly shown to be the real threat. Without wasting time gushing over the oppositional tension of our antagonist and protagonist, it suffices to say this is the most intense and metaphysical conflict I've seen on screen since Rustin Cole and the Yellow King in True Detective S1. Collin and Schinkel's scenes are the highlight, easily, but every character individually and opposite our protagonist possesses a distinct characterization that adds to the movie's dramatic fullness. Each on-screen personality feels as unique as chess pieces, and their interplay creates a consistently satisfying story that winds on into the darkest and lightest parts of the human psyche. Anne Barbara, Amanda Collin, also holds great sway in her scenes, and forgoing a choice here and there that feels like reductive ways to increase her character's motivation, almost entirely sidesteps the clichés of damaged, angry person. The Promised Land nails the hearth-heated claustrophobia of stuffy manors and clean open beauty of the Dutch countryside with its sound and cinematography, but feels left out of the spotlight in favor of the many moving pieces of character stakes. It still does a great job of conveying the period, but I wish there had been a little more dualism created with the man-made environments which seem to exist largely in the background. Apart from a few minor gripes that are natural symptoms of a heavily loaded narrative, The Promised Land delivers an utterly thrilling experience with a clear and beautiful message. A retired military captain, Ludvig Collin Mads Mikkelsen, arrives in 1755 on the barren Jutland region of Denmark, with single goal, to follow his king's call to cultivate the heath, and thus get rich, earn a noble title. However, the wealthy, powerful/cruel landowner, Frederick de Schinkel, Bennebjerg, believes that this heath belongs to him, not the king. To make matters more complicated, de Schinkel's beautiful, unmarried cousin, Edel Helene Christine Kuja Thorpe, comes to admire Collin. After two of de Schinkel's servants, Johannes and Anna Barbara Amanda Collin, run away and seek refuge with Collin, the landowner, also local judge, does everything to drive Collin away and get revenge. I heard about this movie while watching coverage via YouTube of the Venice Film Festival in fall 2023. This film, Danish title, Bastarden, was the official submission of Denmark for Best International Feature Film at the 2024 Academy Awards. It was directed by Nikolaj Arcel and based on a novel by Jensen, loosely inspired by real historical characters. If you miss old-fashioned epics, visually and thematically, then I highly recommend it. Fans of the Western genre may also enjoy The Promised Land, available to rent on Amazon Prime. There are at least two scenes which I felt were callbacks to The Godfather. Y'all can let me know if you notice that. Mikkelsen, who was a dancer for 8 years before falling into acting, has great screen presence. He can do a lot with just his eyes and facial expressions. Keep in mind that this is a time when men are trying to hold in emotions. An engaging epic, a character study, and a moving drama, all in one. With a strong screenplay examining interesting themes, witty, minimalist dialogue, and well-drawn characters, the narrative consistently engages. The cinematography and production design are striking, while the score is subtly powerful. This film uses all the tools of the Western genre: wide landscapes, settlers developing harsh lands, the fight against greed, injustice, cruelty, and impunity of the ruling class, a stubborn loner who learns to follow his heart, and old versus new technologies, in this case, agricultural, settlers fighting rich landowners, racial prejudices, and of course, a showdown with a powerful obligatory scene. First of all, Mads Mikkelsen is a phenomenal actor and the perfect choice to play Ludvig Collin. He shines especially in the scenes where he only acts out pure emotion with his facial expressions without having to say a word. Throughout the movie you feel all kinds of emotions yourself: anger, hatred, sadness, frustration, disgust, joy, relief. I felt it all. It is a roller coaster ride of emotions. Directed by Nikolaj, Arcel, screenplay by Nikolaj Anders Thomas Jensen, produced by Bluest, starring Mads Mikkelsen, Amanda Collin, Simon Cinematography Rasmus Vibe, edited by Olivier Bug, music by Dan Rohr, production company Zentropa Entertainments, Nordisk Film and TV Fonts, Augustelavision, Zentropa International, Sweden, Zentropa, distributed by Nordisk Film, distribution release dates August 31st, 2023 in Venice, October 5th, 2023 in Denmark, running time 27 minutes, countries Germany, Sweden, language 25 Danish, German, budget €1,000,000, box office $956,000 movie, and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.